Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of our alphabetical taboo busting journey. We're going to talk today about R for regret. Now, regret is a feeling that we all know, and I'm sure if I go on any further without introducing Sylvia, I would regret it deeply. So, Sylvia, welcome to the show as always.
Hello, my friend. Good to see you.
Likewise. Now, we decided to keep it really simple and just straightforward this week, and we really just want to dive into one aspect of regret. And so, along with some personal anecdotes, we want to talk about how we deal with feelings of regret and how we stop ourselves from falling down the rabbit hole of thinking, what if, what could have happened, what should have happened. And really, I guess to kick us off, I want to share a big crossroads moment in my life that even before I made a decision, I wondered if I'd regret it. And this is the depth of how regret can mess with you because I was there, I had the choice of a few different things. So I was in film school, really enjoying it, really doing well, but I was also playing with a band. And the band got offered a tour of the US and Canada. So for someone growing up on an island in the North Atlantic Ocean, that's like chance of a lifetime kind of thing. But at the same time as well, my then girlfriend was moving to a different country for university, and I was sort of looking at all these options. I thought I kind of have to choose one. I'll either move to go be with her, I'll chase this rock star dream in the promised land, or I'll stick with film school and keep my job alongside it. And I thought whatever option I choose, like I'm gonna miss out on something, and I'm gonna get something. And at the time, I got really stuck in thinking, what's the right choice? And the reality of it is, there isn't a right choice. You just have to make one. And I chose to move to be with my girlfriend, now wife, helped the band find someone to go in my place. They went on their tour, and I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't a hint of bitterness when I was moving and I was in the midst of like trying to find an apartment, trying to find a job, working through the painful bureaucracy of British banking, and seeing Facebook updates of them being like, "Oh, we're at the Grand Canyon. We're playing the St. Vita's bar in New York." Me being there like, "I'm staying with some Germans with a recycling company on Airbnb." Like, it's hard not to feel a little bit bitter in that scenario,
Mhm.
but at the same time, I was I was kind of forced to look at the what ifs from a different perspective than I maybe would have
Mhm.
otherwise, where I started thinking if I would have gone on that tour, we would have played, we would have had a lot of fun, but at the end of it, I would have come back to Iceland with still with a girlfriend in another country. I would have dropped out of film school anyway, and I would have had to find a new job because, spoiler alert, playing one tour as a metal band is not going to have you made for life. Um, so for me, it was about building something that would last. It was about building a foundation
Mhm.
to one day be in the place where, to be honest, I feel like I'm getting to now. So when I look back, I have no regrets from what I did, but at the same time, I know that if I would have chosen any of the other options, I would have still made the best of it.
This is interesting. I love that you focused on such a monumental crossroad, right? You really could have gone left, you could have gone right, and you chose one over the other. As I was preparing for our episode, what just really stands out about your example, in contrast to my reflection as I prepare for our chat today, was that I had so many of those scenarios. It's like regret was the norm, right? And I really thought about why that is, right? So even as I was listening to kind of the painstaking process that you went through to be like, I have to give up something to achieve something else or to gain something else, right? Like I really appreciated how deep you were with that introspection, right? You probably had to dig deep uh, in many ways over probably a period of time to be like, okay, like not only did I make this decision, I now have to live with it and be at peace with it or celebrate it, right? And really be forward focused on it. But anyway, back to the original point that I couldn't think of just one because I had so many, and I chuckle, and I think that's why, when you and I first started talking this afternoon, I really wanted to focus on how to overcome that, because it actually, that kind of rumination, that kind of woulda, coulda, shoulda, which, by the way, I gave a somewhat risque term to. Should I say it, by the way?
Go for it.
I call it masturbation. So, because
10
well,
out of 10.
I was saying it so often, right? It was like I would be like, well, I'm kind of going through this like woulda, coulda, shoulda phase, and then I finally was just like, I'm gonna make it like easier to say and catchier. So, masturbation is what I call it. I really started thinking about how I was so burdened by all these moments of masturbating and all the woulda, coulda, shouldas, and how working on a lot of the things that we've talked about in our journey together about how to fix my mindset, right? How to think about that decision process differently with abundance, how to even develop self-trust, which I know we'll talk a bit about as we continue in this conversation and in the series. Yet this idea of learning to have a couple techniques to reframe, right? That focus on the lost opportunity. Um, it was monumental, yet it came only as a result of me also building out my vernacular, right? My confidence, my perspective in these other areas that I just referenced. So just wanted to celebrate that. Like, I love that you have one. I have like on the opposite end, like too many to even name.
Well, I definitely have more
Mhm.
that I could choose from, but I just feel that
Yeah.
one is like it was literally I felt myself getting to a crossroads,
Yeah.
and I feel like when you do get stuck in that masturbation,
Mhm.
you kind of have to become a master debater in
Yeah.
order to be able to talk your way
Yeah.
out of just that cycle, because it's so easy to go, oh, I could go there and be with her, but then I
Mhm.
lose out on this. But if I go there, it'll be, you
Mhm.
have to kind of take a step back, because I'm a big believer in very often just going with my gut. Like I
Mhm.
found that most often that is what I need to do, because I am prone to overthinking. I am prone to getting stuck in, and it's something I'm quite, I guess, proud of in my life, that I've, in very many parts of my life, broken out of that cycle of overthinking. But that overthinking is also, in many ways, a cause for regret, because when I start looking back and I think about all the things that I overthought rather than going for them, and largely, actually, funnily enough, based on the story that I told, for example, music. And I've mentioned this in another episode where my obsessive perfectionism kept me for the longest time from doing anything with music, because nothing was ever perfect and nothing ever will be. So it's really easy. And I kind of wanted to move into at least how I get over those feelings when they do come up, because obviously, even I can say all day I don't believe in regret, but obviously it happens.
Yeah.
But the choice to not let regret control me, I've chosen to make it into a fuel. So anytime I think, oh, I should have done more with my music, I go, well, what can I do now to do more with it? I'm still alive. I still have time. I'm going
Yeah.
to do something.
Yes.
So doing those things, and even even actively seeking out, what could you regret?
Mhm.
And there's this popular saying of, it's easier to regret things that you have done than haven't. And I've heard it used in both positive and negative connotations,
Mhm.
but in many ways, I actually agree with it,
Mhm.
because if I sit back and I think, all those cliche stories about, what people most regret on their deathbeds or something, it's almost always, oh, I should have done more of this, or I should have spent more time with loved ones or something. And even though I think people become a bit desensitized to it, because don't know how many times I can see that on like a background of a sunset and people going, "Oh, so true," while sharing it on Facebook. I don't know how many times I can see that more, but it is, I think, a healthy perspective to bring to think, you know, if you already have started regretting something, the fact that you're feeling that regret means it's not too late most of the time. And if it really is too late, then it's just about accepting that you can't do anything about it, and that's harder than easier to say than to do it.
Hmm.
Um, but but at the same time, like it's something that we've got to let go. Like find a way to either rectify it now
Hmm.
or let it go, because otherwise you're just going to spend so much time, energy to just wallow.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly the point, right? In that it's not worth that mental anguish, or there's a way to lessen that mental anguish. I think that's a probably better way to phrase it. This is interesting. I love the way you framed how when that emotion of regret or potential lost opportunity services, that is a trigger for us to pause and look at it, right? Instead of trying to shy away from it or deny it. And I just had this insight when you were sharing your story that all the inner work I did started because I saw a pattern. Speaking of our alphabetical journey, I saw a pattern of behavior and thinking that centered around how, right, I would make a decision based on what I thought I should be doing, not what I wanted to be doing. And so there was always this conflict, right? It's like what the right thing is over here, yet it aligns very little or not at all to what was really here in my intentions, which
Mm,
was a word I didn't even use as of 2 years ago. And so, right, it's like I felt in conflict or incongruent, and I just call it regret because I didn't know any better, right? It was just like, well, I was told to do this or that this was the right thing to do, so I went here, but my heart was always somewhere else, right? And that regret was really a trigger that I was not being truthful with myself, or I was not intentional, or I had zero intentions or zero awareness of those intentions. And once I started to learn that, you know what, like the best service I can give to others is if I serve myself first with that truth and deliberateness in my intentions. So, right, it was not that I didn't know how to make executive decisions, right? It's not that I didn't have the gut feeling, yet this got in the way or Trump, it was louder than what was here. And so all the incongruence, all the conflict, all the masturbating came about. Yet once I learned that, hey, whose should voice is that? Who's shooting on me, right? Like who is dictating this path to me, and does this person's values and outlook align with mine? Once I learned to separate that, then some of these other techniques that I think you and I have definitely talked about in our past conversations as friends, but certainly have referenced and hinted at this afternoon, is that, right, like once we can separate out our own intentions versus other people's voices or what we think is the right path based on someone else's definition, we can start to be um, patient and kind, right? And self-forgiving, to be like, okay, like you said, there's no perfect decision, yet based on what I know and what I understand and what I'm capable of at this moment in this, at this juncture, in this moment in time, I'm going to go here. And to also give yourself the grace to go at some point, right? Like down the road, you might be like, man, that that it wasn't quite what I thought it would be. And it's okay, right? Like we don't have the magic 8 ball. And also to be even more forgiving when we are looking at things in our past through the power of hindsight. Like Of course. Like, yeah, like after the fact, when we saw all the pieces, of course we had the insight. Like, duh. There's actually a really funny Cantonese saying. It's an idiom, and it boils down to something to the effect of, if everybody knew, there would be no one on the streets homeless. Or like, it's a lot like ringier, catchier in the native language. Where this idiom surfaced from. So like when I say in Cantonese, it like rolls off the tongue, and it's like this phrase that we would say to one another in our family and with friends, to be like literally like, no regret, no, just no regret, right? But what it's really saying is like, yeah, like if everybody had a magic 8 ball, we would all be wealthy and gazillionaires. So there would be no one living on the streets. Duh. And that is something that I didn't fully appreciate. Even though I like logically understood it, I didn't fully appreciate it until I could learn to have that self-trust and to separate out, really, like, is this my own intention, or is this somebody else's dictating to me what they think my intention should be?
Yeah, I think, it's really easy, like you said, to have that hindsight and think, oh, if I knew back then what I do now, but
You
that's kind of
didn't.
like saying, yeah, you didn't.
You
It's
did.
kind of like saying,
Yeah.
oh, if you got beat up by like a school bully, oh man, if I had the strength of a 30-year-old, I could have beat that 8-year-old kid up. Like you could have, but you didn't.
Right.
And if you
Fact of
had
the
the
matter is,
strength of, yeah, and it's a pointless could
yeah,
have or should have
yeah.
scenario. And
Mm,
I know that to a lot of people that hear that sort of thing, they're like, oh, of course it's pointless, but that doesn't change how I feel about it. And it's true, it doesn't
mm,
immediately, but it's a process. It's, breaking a pattern means creating a new one. And it's just like with so many other things. Like
mm,
if you think about things like addiction, breaking an addiction or breaking a habit is really, really, really difficult. Replacing it is easier. It's why you see people who struggle with addiction fall really deep into something else that looks a hell of a lot like addiction, but is something that's more accepted. And it's similar with regret. It's not about taking away the feeling, it's redirecting it. And like you said, it's sort of allowing yourself that space to analyze it.
mm-hmm,
Why do I feel like I regret this?
mm-hmm.
Then
Right.
instead of going, how would I have done it differently back then? Because at the end of the day, you can think about it, but it's not gonna change it. But if you
Mm-hmm.
think, what could I do about that now? How can I change the trajectory based on that now? Or
Yeah.
how can I use what I learned from that perceived mistake
Mm-hmm.
to do better now?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's because it's the same. Like if we take a really simple example that a lot of people who will maybe watch this from LinkedIn will be familiar with, like a job interview. We've all been in a job interview where we've maybe messed up a question. We've come out and we've thought, oh, if only I would have said this differently, or if only I would have done this slightly different, or whatever. Most people don't just go to one job interview, go to a few different ones, maybe even a hell of a lot of ones. And you learn, you bring that with you.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that with so many different things in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And if we spend the energy that it takes to be regretful and spend it mostly on the positive side of things, I'm not saying you can't grieve a mistake. It's healthy to give yourself the space to feel that,
Yes.
but you need to give yourself limited space to feel that and then move on. Because I read this. Now, I'm not a sports fan, but I've referenced this book a lot on my LinkedIn. It's called "The Score Takes Care of
Mm-hmm.
Itself" by Bill Walsh. And there's this bit where he talks about how to deal with loss. And obviously, he's talking about losing a football game. But there's so much truth in the way that he talks about, like, give yourself time to grieve. He's like, losing sucks. You've got to let yourself feel that suckage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then he said you analyze why you lost. You analyze, like he talked about sitting for hours watching recordings and making notes and going, this is how we avoid that thing happening again. It didn't mean he'd never lose again.
Right.
It just meant that he was a lot less likely to lose to that very same mistake. And, to use an extraordinarily cliche term, we live and we learn.
Hmm. I couldn't agree more. Yet I just had this sort of calling to share an example that's a little bit of an inverse to what you just said, and that hopefully will lead us into some of the things we want to talk about next week. So I, over the years, have had many friends, both male and female, come to me and say, I did that one thing on that date, and that's why they never called me back, right? So they ruminate back, they rewind the tape and go, if I had only ordered the fish instead of the chicken, or vice versa, whatever. If I had only worn red and not blue, if I had only not mentioned this or that, and I can see why they would want to sort of explain
Hmm.
explain away the pain of not being chosen or desire, right? Like they wanted to find an action that would explain why the person essentially didn't call them back, right? Or ghosted them or rejected them essentially. Yet I always, whenever someone says that, I go, I can see why you would want to dive into that. But let me ask this: would you want to be in a relationship with someone where your every move was scrutinized, right? Where you felt like you had to be on point with how you use cutlery, right? How your hair looked or didn't look, or fill in the blank, whatever action or behavior, right? Like I go, like, is that even something you would want? And I know that's probably not the most comforting thing that my friends wanted to hear from me. Yet that I go, like the job interview scenario, I'm like, if one thing I said contributed to me not being picked by these people, I don't know that it aligns with who I am, right? And
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
yeah, like I don't want to show up to every meeting and be like, like I don't, oh my God, I don't want that anxiety in my life. I don't need that stressor in my life. That's not fun for me
No,
anymore.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like I'm 100% the same, and I think um, I guess to backtrack a little bit from what I said, I think if it is clearly a mistake, like I'm talking like you really messed up, fair dues. But I think your dating example made me think of it a little bit differently because like that is such a gut feel thing. And like you said, don't regret not getting into a shitty situation, right? Like, don't
Yeah.
regret having made a choice that probably saved you from a crappy relationship where you couldn't have made it work, whether that's a work-related
Right.
relationship or a
Yeah.
romantic one.
Hmm.
And like, it just reminded me of I was speaking to a few colleagues yesterday. We were talking about first dates, and one of my colleagues said that he'd gone to a scary movie with his girlfriend, but he really doesn't like scary movies, so he pretended to sleep in order to be able to have his eyes closed in the scary movie. Um, and when you said this, and I thought that if they hadn't gone out again, he probably would have thought back and gone, "Ugh, if only I would have, powered through. If only I would have watched the film with her, maybe." But she probably didn't think the world of the fact that he slept over over the horror movie. But there must have been something. There was a gut reaction. There was something that made them go out again. And my response to that was the fact that the first film my wife and I saw together was Clerks 2, and anyone who's seen that will know that it's an incredibly vulgar film filled with incredibly, well, let's just say tasteless jokes. It's Kevin Smith. It's brilliant, but it's not necessarily going to appeal to the most conservative crowds. And I'm sure there would be people that would go with someone to a movie like that and afterwards go, oh, if only we would have seen something more romantic. But in reality, like you said,
Yeah.
that shouldn't be the defining factor. You know, Can you ever imagine meeting a married couple that's been together for 60 years and you go, what's the secret to your relationship? Oh, when we first met, he took me to Casablanca. It was such a beautiful film. It was romantic. We're like, oh, we saw The Notebook. Just his choice of the fine art of cinema, it ticked the box. And
Yeah.
ever since then, every time we have a problem, we just go, remember when he bought those movie tickets? Like, nah, man, that's not how anything works.
Well, I'll share one final anecdote, and then we'll start to maybe shift gears a little bit and share and preview for our guests what's coming up next. So I went on a date some years ago, many years ago, before I met Luke. And after dinner, this guy was like super quiet in the car, and I'm like, oh, like, what's wrong? Are you okay? He goes, I really didn't like the way you ate. I go, okay,
Oh.
okay. I go, well, can you give me an example? He goes, yeah, no, it just bothers me the way you eat. I'm like, is it the noise? Like, what is it? He couldn't pinpoint it. So then I go, okay, all right, see you later. Like, I think we're done here. And like, the weird thing was like he literally was like, yeah, I don't think I could go out with someone like that. I'm like, that's fine. Like, okay, I'm whatever. Like, I hadn't really invested in it anyway. I'm like, whatever. See you later, weirdo. And he was actually astounded that like I was okay with that. Like I'm like, okay, like you don't like it. I don't like people who critique me for, like, I love food. Like I want to go out with people who like geek out over the dish, right? All the ingredients, like all the way the pairings come together. Like, I want to eat with someone like that. I'm like, I'm not gonna eat with some a-hole who, criticized me for the way I ate. Like, I'm like, so anyway, like I was like, okay, bye. Like, no, literally no love lost, like, because it was not even there. It was not earned, like there was nothing lost. And yet like he was astounded. And it was just so weird, right? And I share this story only to say that, like, again, for me in this department, I was lucky enough to have that, self-confidence to know that, well, this does not align.
Yeah.
And I really encourage, those of you right now who, especially, coming out of COVID, or, there are COVID casualties, and, a lot of us who are high performers, hard workers, who did everything right, right? If you are a casualty of, the COVID economic situation, and you're beating yourself up, right? I really encourage those of us who are, or might be in that boat to go, okay, like ruminating on that one thing you did or didn't do, or that project deadline, or not, whatever thing that whatever detail you're ruminating on. I just really want to encourage people to give themselves the forgiveness and the grace to go, like, it wasn't aligned, or like you likely had some misgivings, let's say, about the place that you were last at anyway. And not to say like that you would have this dismissive attitude about it, but really learn from it, and learn from it as in a way that really helps you get centered on what would good look like for me. What would something that aligns with who I am, my values, and my intentions, what would that look like? And how would I feel when I do have that as my opportunity? So I just want to share that.
No, I love that, Sharon. It sets us up really nicely to talk about next week, because throughout this episode we've been talking about really how to talk yourself out of that regret. And it's one of the few episodes where we haven't talked about bringing anyone else in. We haven't talked about having an accountability partner. We haven't talked about opening up about it to someone else, because really, at least for me, bouncing back from regret is a topic of self-talk, which is something we're going to talk about next week. Because for me, the way that I talk to and about myself is one of the things where, when I look back, when I shifted in the way that I spoke about myself and to myself internally, it changed the way that I thought about myself, and subsequently changed how I acted, how I carried myself, which then impacted how other people saw me, acted towards me. And it was one of those things where if someone had told me oh, you just need to talk about yourself differently, talk to yourself differently, it'll change. I would have absolutely brushed it off. I would have been like, oh man, fake it till you make it. Great. Um,
Mhm.
but it honestly is really powerful. And I'm sure someone will watch next week's episode and be exactly like I would have been back then. But hopefully one day, some of you out there that listen that might struggle with that will reach that point of great self talk, great self belief, and think back and go, yeah, you know what? That's it.
Yep. Love that. And I have a perfect quote that I think I would love to start our next chat with. So more to come on that, my friend.
Perfect. Looking forward to it.